time here at St James's Park, Newcastle United have beaten Manchester City 2-1. And what a performance it was. It was absolutely needed given what had happened in the last two away games. And there are a lot of questions still to be answered away from home against Everton and obviously Sunderland coming up. But lots of questions about the direction of the season generally that I think have been answered. I think this is a game that can really relight the fire, and that'll be the message that I'll write about in my piece for 442. That'll be out either Sunday or Monday. Just spoke to Tino Livramento in there, and he was really happy to be back. Obviously, first game for about 7 weeks. Obviously, got injured against Arsenal at the end of September, and he's made such a difference. Him and Lewis Hall were real difference makers for Newcastle. They looked much more energetic, much tighter, connected in attack as well. Obviously, Harvey Barnes scoring twice, having two other good opportunities, much more involved. Big criticism of recent weeks, even at St James's Park, and performances in the league has been how isolated Nick Woltemade has looked and how isolated Anthony Gordon and Barnes at times, and the other wingers have looked as well. But real claim staked by Barnes in the absence of Gordon, who was only just missed out by the sounds of it because he was sort of close. He's trained this week, so he should be fine for a return to Everton next week, possibly even Marseille on Tuesday. We'll obviously hear more about that next week. But Livramento pleased to be back, obviously makes such a difference, as I say, in terms of his energy levels. You can see it's night and day between him, Dan Burn and Kieran Trippier. Just the energy levels, obviously the age difference, 33 and 35, Burn and Trippier. The quality of going forward, he looked much more naturally suited to being at right back, which I've said on a Patreon video and have written in previous weeks as well, that he's become really strong at left back, and in the absence of Lewis Hall, it's probably the first time in a long time the pair of them have played together, and he looked suited to right back again. He's played left back a lot in recent weeks and months and done really well, as I said, but finally looks at home at right back, and hopefully that can be his home for a long time to come. He was asked about his future, obviously 2 years in his contract. He said that, again, nothing really to report on that, unlike the Sandro Tonali stuff, which was the last time I was in the mix zone. But yeah, I thought Newcastle were absolutely fantastic. Grew into the game after a decent start. Then, you know, City dominated the ball. Their press was really good, I thought, in spells, and they set traps for City and really punished them at times. But City were quite static as well, didn't really create many issues. You didn't really feel at any point in the game that City were going to get on top. Even once they equalised, it wasn't like, here we go again. You know, Newcastle just hit back immediately. Bruno and Tonali were the bosses of the midfield in across the game today. I think that was absolutely clear. Malik Chow marked Erling Haaland out of the game. I think Erling Haaland's only scored once at St James's Park in I think 3 or 4 appearances, and it was another frustrating game for the Norway striker, who's been in absolutely incredible form this season. There was no real, as a sense like there was against Arsenal, like there was against Liverpool, where they were outclassed at times. I think City were very, very ordinary. They were lacking the creativity that you usually associate with the Pep Guardiola side, and I've written and spoken about that in the past as well. But today's all about Newcastle. This is a real performance that, as I said in my instant reaction on Patreon, and I think that the big thing to say is that all the questions aren't answered, because all the questions have mainly been away from home. Newcastle have won 7 of their last 10 games. Only one of those has been away from home, I think, so, and not in the league. So the big question will obviously again be asked at Everton. Can they handle that? Can they handle the dynamic change? Can they handle the ability to play against a crowd that isn't backing them? Because, as I said, you know, after the Athletic game last time I was here, Sandro Tonali and Bruno Guimaraes both said that the crowd makes such a difference. St James's Park is a special place because the crowd can help teams along, and it did feel like that, particularly in the second half, that the crowd got involved. But I thought Newcastle were very good. The midfield, as I say, dominated. Bruno broke the lines really well, and actually at times played in that number 6 role, and Tonali went forward a little bit. So that dovetailing was back, which we haven't seen for a couple of years. The definition of their play in midfield has been what's most interesting over the last year or so. But back to that sort of fluidity and dovetailing, which I think really worked quite well in this game. Can we see a bit more of that in coming weeks? We'll see. But one thing I did notice and I really wanted to touch on was Nick Woltemade. I think was much more involved, got in behind a couple of times. His shots were a bit weak in the first half. He had a decent opportunity in the second half as well. Donnarumma made some decent saves too, but his link-up play was strong, and I think Newcastle need to start playing towards that a bit more. You saw Barnes and Murphy get close to Voltemade, linking much better, like they have in the Champions League. That was allowed to happen today. And there was one break where the ball came aimlessly and it just landed at Voltemade's feet, instant turn into space, and away went Murphy. I think that's what Newcastle need to focus on. It isn't about telling the wingers to do anything different, it's about telling the wingers to get more involved and closer to Voltemade than they've done in the Premier League, but also just being a bit more patient, because we saw again today what Voltemade can do when he does get in behind, when he does play on the shoulder. It'll take time, that isn't his natural game, we know that, but maybe there needs to be a bit more patience when talking about Voltemade and what happens in the future. Really, really big win today for Newcastle. They were rocking, St James's Park was rocking. This is Newcastle at their very best again, and this is what can hopefully be a foundation to build from in the Premier League. Still 14th, but only 5 points off 4th, I think, now, and that can be a gap that can be closed, hopefully, with a win and a good performance, crucially, against Everton. Burnley hit back here at St James's Park in the league, then obviously Sunderland. There are some crucial games coming up, but lots of questions over Eddie Howe's future, some that I've perpetuated in my videos and in my articles, but huge answers about whether the players are playing for him today, huge answers about if the crowd is still behind him, everybody's still pulling in the same direction. At St James's Park there are no problems, there are huge questions to be asked against Everton, but first up Marseille in the Champions League, and that's going to be a really difficult proposition as well on Tuesday. I'll be back tomorrow to give some more considered thoughts, having watched the game back a little bit from my office. And
so I'm back in my office. It's the morning after the night before, and there's lots to discuss from Newcastle's victory over Manchester City yesterday. A big quote from Tino Livramento in the mix zone was "back to basics," and I really felt that as well. At fullback, I think Newcastle really gained, as I said yesterday, from having Livramento and Lewis Hall back together. Allowed the wingers to feel a lot more connected to the fullbacks, allowed wide areas to be much more dynamic, allowed Voltemade in the midfield to get more involved as well. Voltemade as well, crucially, as I said yesterday, played more on the shoulder, got higher up the pitch, more advanced, and I think, as I said, maybe we just have to be a little bit more patient. Maybe we just have to understand that it's not his game, it'll take time to adjust, and the absence of Yoane Wissa, and there was more discussion about Wissa's further delayed training and the fact that he's not back in there yet and whether he's going to be fit and stuff. So you've just got to bear with Newcastle in that sense and bear with Nick Voltemade and Eddie Howe. But I really want to talk about the fullbacks and Tino Livramento in particular. We did talk to him yesterday in the mix zone, but the way he marked Jeremy Doku, man marked, pressed high, pressed more efficiently. As I said yesterday, I think Newcastle set traps and did quite well. They didn't go manically pressing. They had a mid-block and they did really well. But Livramento particularly marks Doku very well, a lot similarly to the way he marked Mohamed Salah in the cup final. It was quite a high-risk strategy, going man for man, which Newcastle do tend to do quite a bit, but he did really well in exposing himself in the space and behind. That Man City did get in quite a bit, and there were chances for City. They didn't have their best day in front of goal. I think Malik Chow deserves a lot of credit for the way he marshalled Erling Haaland, but there were a few times in the midfield where Foden got free. That came from the risk that Newcastle and Tino Livramento took in going high, pressing high. That allowed Newcastle to get higher up the pitch and make more of an impact in their own attacking ways. So it paid off. Newcastle really did, I think, deserve the victory in the second half for their bravery, for their organisation, for that risk-taking, but also I think the midfield did really well. Joe Linton covered in for Livramento at times, but also in midfield as well. Bruno dominating the ball, Tonali just everywhere as per usual. The back four, only Chow kept his place, and you saw why. I mean, he's absolutely imperious. I thought Cher did really well. Newcastle obviously lacked his diagonal passing range while he's been out of the team, and Newcastle's build-up play has been very different, more central because of Chow and Botman playing shorter balls into the midfield. The return of that diagonal pass, again allowing the fullbacks to express themselves and get higher up the pitch and widen the pitch and expose Manchester City out wide where they're perhaps a little bit weaker. Nico O'Reilly and Matheus Nunes is probably where you would likely to get at Man City, to threaten Man City. So I think they did that really well as well. But there, the pressing was really, really on point. And as Tino Livramento said, it was back to basics. It looked more like Newcastle United once again at their very best. But as I said yesterday, I think a lot of people have said the iron test, the acid test will come. Marseille this week in the Champions League. They're doing so well in the Champions League, Newcastle, because they've had their home form. A big test to go to Marseille and get a result. Obviously, that's not impossible because Atalanta did it in the last game, I think, or the game before. So there's a real opportunity there, and we'll talk more about that on Monday in a preview. But yeah, I thought that Newcastle looked much more comfortable. It's no surprise that it came when Tino Livramento and Lewis Hall played together again. For something completely different to Dan Burn and Kieran Trippier, who are both getting on in age and can't get up and down the pitch. And you really saw the energy levels and that ability to take more risks and that ability to play to their strengths more because of the fullbacks. There's lots of talk consistently about the midfield and the makeup of that. There's lots of talk this season about Nick Voldemort, how he's doing, the wingers, how they're doing, and everything seemed to click much more into place when the fullbacks were there. So it may be that Newcastle need to look for more cover and do different things at fullback with having similar sort of types of players and profile of player, because they don't really have that once Hall and Livramento have not been there. It was covered a little bit by Livramento playing on the left and doing really well, but he looked back at home at right back as well with Hall at left back. It's been a very, very difficult almost year without the pair of them. And I think that has hindered Newcastle quite considerably, particularly out wide when they are quite isolated in the wingers, and Voltemada has been isolated as a result of that as well. That'll hopefully be more of an impact away from home. That's where there's a lot to be answered for. They need to go and win at Everton to really pull this recovery. I think I've said in the thumbnail, is it a big reset? Is it a big moment? In some ways it is, because there have been those season-defining wins, those catalysts in both negative and positive in a way. You think back to Brentford last year, that was a real nadir. They picked up and had 10 wins. After that, can this be a similar sort of response to them going on a good run before Christmas, getting themselves back into the picture? They are only, I think, 4 or 5 points off the top 4, so it's far from unsavable. As I said in my Patreon preview yesterday from Pitchside, do check out Patreon. There's a link in the description, and also subscribe if you haven't already to the channel. Hopefully there will be more content. It has been a few difficult weeks for me with the channel and stuff, but I really do appreciate all the support. Really big win, but as I say, the big moments are coming. They need to back that up with wins in Marseille against Everton, and of course, crucially, the derby that's coming up as well. That'll really show if Newcastle have turned a corner. I don't think we learned too much that we didn't already know about the impact of the fullbacks, about Newcastle's ability to raise their game at home, about the fact that the crowd can have an impact, about what Newcastle look like when their midfield is really good. But we did learn, I think, a bit more about how Nick Voldemort can have an impact in this team, because he did play more on the shoulder in the first half. Particularly had a good header, which was a good save by Donnarumma, a couple of decent chances in either half as well. Hopefully that's signs of things to come. Thanks so much for joining me. As I say, like, share and subscribe. I'll be back tomorrow to look ahead to the Marseille game. Reaction might be a little bit difficult because I am away for a few days this week, but I will be back for Everton as well. So hopefully much more content coming over the next few weeks. Do get involved if you haven't already, and also sign up on Patreon, because I've got so many big plans with mailbag episodes and more content to come over there. So get involved with the link in the description, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.